Good morning, Baltimore. Good morning, Baltimore. This is Robert DeShiel again with you today with my co-host and colleague and friend Hassan Barnes.
Good morning. Good morning. How are
And
you guys?
this is, I think, the third edition of a new podcast that we've started called Money, Power, and Politics. Our purpose is to inform, to engage, and to hopefully have matters seen in somewhat of a different way. We strive always to be accurate as it relates to whatever facts we present. We welcome fact checkers, and we will be very plain when what we're stating is a matter of our opinion. We recognize that everyone is entitled to their opinion if you recognize that all opinions are not weighted the same. So, with that, Hassan, what's on your mind this morning?
Good morning. Certainly, we been out to the whole country, but we're located in Maryland, in Baltimore. I want to talk about the plan of theirs to have vending machines. So when I was younger, years ago,
What kind of vending machines you talking about?
it's a vending machine like chips and Norcan and all kind of things. Let me get into it. When I was younger, they had a thing where they had needle exchange, where people who were suffering from heroin addiction, they would give free needles. And the idea was, if we give you the needles, it will reduce the spread of HIV/AIDS. So if clean needles would be, you wouldn't have to reuse them. So the people were reusing needles, and that was sort of at the time to be the cause of the spread of AIDS. Now we've later learned AIDS is spread much more through sexual interaction, sexual intercourse, but that's another method. So there's a plan in Maryland. Let me pull it up. Let's see here. Let's see. Baltimore City Health Department has a plan called HRVM or MRVM, harm reduction vending machines. So they want to have vending machines that have Narcan to prevent overdoses. They have drug detection kits. They have feminine hygiene kits. They have fentanyl testing strips. They have pregnancy testing strips or pregnancy testing supplies, safe sex kits, and safe injection kits. Wound care kits. It's pretty much a whatever you can do to get for safety and medical. And the idea that if we give the people, they'll be safer. Now, I don't know that you need a pregnancy kit. I don't know if that's a safety issue, but they have that there as well. But and it has Narcan, so you OD on methadone or OD on a narcotic, they can give you that as well. I don't know the person who's ODing is the one who's getting those things out of the machine, but they want to have those things available in an urban city where there is many people suffering from substance abuse issues.
What does this program indicate? How access to these machines would be made unavailable to people who it would be inappropriate to have?
No.
I mean, how can a minor walk up to one of these machines as it's described and stick a quarter in and get a jar of Narcan?
And I haven't seen where the machines are located. I've seen the release from the Baltimore City Department of Health. And I don't know where they are. I would assume, based on the purpose of it, no, anyone can use it. So if in fact you were having an overdose, that could be a juvenile. Juveniles also use illicit drugs. So I don't see them limiting the use and access to adults. It's likely anyone who can get to it. Now, I'm assuming it'll be in a place where a 9-year-old wouldn't be around to get it, but you can't say for sure.
Right.
It may be something that's open, and anyone who comes by can get it.
Do we know when the city is planning to have this program go live?
I'm under the impression it's already live. But again, I went on the city site, I went on the Department of Health site, and I saw the plan. I saw they approved it or the initiative. I haven't seen where the machines have been. So when I see a machine, I'm taking a picture of it so we can bring it back here and talk more about it. I haven't seen the actual machines itself. I'm assuming they're around. I just haven't seen one.
One last question. Does this relate at all to some effort to further decriminalize the use of drugs? And will it encourage people to make the wrong choice initially? With assuming for the sake of discussion that most people have drug abuse problems, regardless of the drug, that it started with a voluntary decision to use in the first place. Does making these machines available deter or encourage the wrong choice?
Good question. I don't think the plan was to continue to reduce the penalties, criminal consequence of drug use. I think it's solely for health issues, because people who use illicit drugs have many health issues. And fentanyl, as the president is using for his, we can talk about that some more. The president using the fentanyl epidemic, and I use air quotes epidemic as to push his executive orders to give him enough power to get things done. I think the goal is to prevent deaths and overdoses among the population in Baltimore, particularly where there's a strong population of people who may be dependent on substances that may include fentanyl or other drugs as well. That's why there's a Narcan kit, so if people overdose on substances, they can be brought back. I think it's more about that. However, to your point, there is a bill in the state legislature to decriminalize paraphernalia. And paraphernalia are things like pipes or baggies or those kind of things. There's a bill, and I'm not sure if it's been passed, but there was a bill in the state legislature in Maryland to decriminalize paraphernalia in a way that makes it just you can buy it. And if you can buy, it's weird. As lawyers, we see people get arrested. I had a client got arrested for selling paraphernalia. They say he sold baggies. And I guess the idea that there's nothing you put in a bag this small other than drugs.
Right,
There's no one you sell in a bag this small to other than drug dealers. So for that, it seems pretty peculiar to penalize them for selling baggies. But the idea is you're not putting baggies with candy in it. It's only drugs. It's only crack or marijuana or different illicit drugs at the time. So you allow businesses to openly sell things to bring people in for illicit purposes. Certain parts of any community, whether you're in New York or you're in Chicago or you're in Baltimore, there'll be neighborhood stores that sell things. They may sell picks where you can hold blunts or hold reefer cigarettes. They may sell baggies. They may sell things. They may sell scales that's used for cutting. And initially, they would do it illicitly. They would do it where you wouldn't see it. Now they can openly sell it, which to me brings in the wrong kind of clientele to the area.
Speaking of drugs, I think we're coming upon the 5th anniversary of what I refer to as the Freddie Gray incident, and I mention it only because, according to reports that I recall reading, Freddie Gray may have been someone who was suffering from drug abuse, and even may have been under the influence even at the time of the incident itself. But the important issue that I want to talk about, the reason I really want to raise it, is the efforts or the determination of the Trump administration essentially to stop the reform movement that was undertaken in the wake of Freddie Gray. I believe I've read that the so-called Department of Justice has essentially advised the jurisdictions that are under these consent decrees that they need not worry going forward about the government enforcing the decree. They have, as I understand it, the DOJ has terminated investigations of other jurisdictions that were underway based upon ongoing complaints. And one thing, according to what I've read, one early result of this implementation of one or more of Trump's executive orders, and I don't know whether this order came under the DEI or whatever, the anti-woke or the free speech impediment. I don't know whether it was in January or March, but one effect that I've read about, the early effect of this lack of abandonment, determination not to enforce the consent decree, is that some jurisdictions have already initiated steps to abandon and dismantle things like police accountability boards, or some jurisdictions I understand that may have not yet implemented, but were considering the use of body cam, which has become a tremendous deterrent, or at least the tremendous ability to determine the facts surrounding police involved incidents. So what should we expect? Baltimore being one of those jurisdictions that's under a federal consent decree, which, given this the Trump administration on this anniversary of Freddie Gray, what should the citizens of Baltimore, what do they have to look forward to, and as it relates to police misconduct, the Baltimore City Police Accountability Board, the Judge Bedard's continued enforcement of the consent decree?
The interesting thing is, and I don't think people perceive this when President Trump became president, people weren't thinking about consent decrees. They were in place and people assumed they were prospectively going to continue in perpetuity or until the end of the decree pursuant to order. The administration is adverse to anything social justice. So anything Black Lives Matter, anything Freddie Gray. There's even a call now for Chauvin, the gentleman who killed what's the brother's name? The gentleman who was I can't think of his name. I'm having but Chauvin is the officer.
We'll get it. I know Chauvin is.
And Chauvin, he kneeled on
George
Floyd. He kneeled on his back and killing George Floyd on his neck actually. Yeah. And he's been convicted and he's in prison. There's a call for him to be pardoned by President Trump. It's a strong cry for it, even though we saw him in real time kill a man. There's been a pushback, all things liberal, and that includes social justice reform. People who are conservative don't disagree that police misconduct is a problem, but they want to address it on a case-by-case basis, which means placate it or give lip service to it. They don't really want any muscular apparatus involved to keep police accountable. So in places like Baltimore, and I'll say this, Baltimore and other liberal cities may have more support. More conservative places, there is no support. I do think there will be a pushback on police accountability, but I don't think it'll go that far in places like Baltimore because it's a fairly liberal city, and Baltimore City is taking back the police department from the state. So in Maryland there was a situation where the Baltimore City police were kind of quasi under city control, quasi under state control. I believe the city council and the mayor have taken steps, if not already, to pull them back in, but to pull them back into under the city control.
It is the police department's under city control.
And as a result, I think they will have, because the city council and the mayor are fairly liberal, I still think there will be some checks and balances on police misconduct. Certainly Baltimore City police have been wearing body cams for years. And I do think it'll be less of an issue in Baltimore than other jurisdictions, but I think it's a problem. Like body cameras, when they first started body camera, people were afraid. Citizens that I don't want to be on camera. People realized very soon, no, we want cameras. We absolutely want cameras because you can see all the wrong things that they do at police stops or at check-ins or at conversations. What I do is I'm gonna get prosecuted for it no matter what, because they said so. But what they do will be on video, and the idea of having it gives some kind of light to all kinds of things that may happen, appropriate or not appropriate. And we've seen many cases since body cameras have been used around the country of police doing things and killing people and lying about it on official statements. And we only found out they were lying because the body cameras were able to show it. It would be unfortunate around the country if other jurisdictions start to either stop using body cameras or not use them at all. But I do think, and we haven't heard much pushback from people who were on the left who are fighting for reform in criminal justice. We assumed we would hear a bigger cry and outcry. It's been solid. We haven't heard anything, whether because they feel like they have no leeway, no ground, but we haven't seen any marches or any arguments or any debates about, like at one point it was defund the police, which in itself, I mean, they didn't really mean defund the police. That was the slogan they used, but we haven't heard from those folks at all. We've heard nothing from people who pushed back against.
In one of these shows, you really are going to have. We're going to get down into the weeds about this use of liberal and conservative, because you throw it around as though there's a common understanding of what it means, and I'm not sure there really is. But we're not. I don't want to deal with it right this minute. But there's no doubt in my mind, at least it's my fervent opinion, humble opinion, if you will, that this administration, this Trump administration, has declared war against Black folk. They've already pardoned. You mentioned the potential pardon of Chauvin. Yeah. They've already pardoned people who committed murder. When they pardoned all the January 6 people. In fact, some have even had the audacity to try to extend the January 6 pardon to people who weren't there, but elsewhere engaging in criminal conduct because of the camaraderie with the sympathy with the people who were there. Of course, the courts have, fortunately, the court said no to that. Also, that you may not have seen the ACLU and others react yet to the Department of Justice retreat from the enforcement of consent decrees, because the Supreme Court did come down with a decision a few weeks ago that was favorable toward public safety, and that is that in evaluating police officer conduct, It used to you used to take a snapshot of the very second in which the action occurred, and now they've said no, that's too limited. Now you got to look at all the circumstances going up to that to see if there was really an effective and safe means of de-escalation, or at a point where which there could have been a choice to use something other than lethal force to deal with the situation. So many people, defense attorneys in particular, I would imagine, see that as some sort of victory. What do you think?
The proof is in the pudding. We don't know yet. We won't know until we have those cases go through the courts. I do, and I use conservative and liberal, and we'll get into what that means, because they mean different things depending on the issue we talk about.
Right.
So, in terms of police reform and criminal justice reform, liberal means they want as much limitations on police powers and then as possible. Conservative means they want no limitation on police power.
Where does the Constitution fit in that discussion? Is either side feel that the Constitution is relevant or binding, or at all, or is it just a difference of opinion? Is the glass half full or half empty, so to speak?
The way they've used it, so the Constitution only comes in terms of who had power to enact the order. So if Trump wanted to enact the order saying this may happen, it's the issue whether he's beyond his power. In terms of the Constitution comes in. It only comes into play with the issues of a defendant claiming their rights were taken away. So it doesn't go to whether they have police reform boards or they go and look into their none of those things are constitutional issues. They didn't come up that way. It's on the backhand. The police issue come in on the backhand, whether or not their actions and behavior went beyond the scope of what's permitted by the. So police officers, as we talk about them, are agents of the state. They work for the state. They are the arm of the state. Officers will tell you they're the law. And you hear most times saying they're the law. They're not the law. They're officers of the state that enforce the law in a way that's supposedly reasonably fair and prudent, and also protect people's rights, and whether it's rights against unreasonable search and seizures, the rights against an illegal arrest, all kind of rights we have. So the dichotomy between the police powers and rights is only in defense of a citizen's rights to freedom and civil rights, as we call them. But that's a different conversation. When they argue about, hey, we want a police board, that's because they want it, and there's no constitutional authority to do it or not. It's just the power inherent in the executive, and typically that power is there, and they have the ability to do it. The only issue is if they're doing it in a way where they're turning a blind eye to people's civil rights being so prime example for years in New York. They had stop and frisk, and they would stop you and frisk you, and they were arresting an inordinate amount of Hispanics and blacks. But they have ground stop and frisk. There was no actual real ground. Just walking down the street and see a black guy.
Profiling.
Yeah, it was racial profiling.
Right.
Come here, but it was called stop and frisk.
Right.
From an older case, and they used stop and frisk for officer safety. He was too black on the street. You had no reason to go to him and stop him and frisk him. So it became a constitutional issue as whether your legitimate purpose of the state to investigate a crime is enough to stop a person in their tracks on the street and touch them and interfere with their free will. And the court found that it wasn't, that you went a bit far beyond. So those things will continue to happen, but without body camera footage, without review boards, no one believes a criminal. The criminal go and say, the police arrested me and I didn't do anything wrong. Oh yeah, I have a rap sheet this long. You have no credibility. No one's going to listen to what you have to say. Officer is an officer of the state. He has no criminal background, and we assume he's right. I had a thing in Baltimore years ago. I was driving, and I got pulled over by a cop. And I saw him. I drove past him. And I pulled over, and I'm like, "Why you pull me over?" He's like, "You're speeding." I'm like, "You don't have a speed gun?" Yeah, no, I rode behind you. And did what? I'm like, "You rode behind me, but by the time you pulled up to me, I was pulling over. You have no way of knowing how fast I was going." Well, we can track your speed in another car. No, you can't do that. In many jurisdictions, that's allowed because they believe the officer. Just them saying I rode behind a suspect is sufficient. No computerized evidence of it, no proof of it, just them saying it. And that's the standard that we live in, that we believe that statement. So we need things like review boards where we can question, how many complaints have you had, officer, for abuse and harm? How many complaints have you had for improper arrest? Because certainly where there's smoke, there may be fire.
Well, wait a second. Look, if we're on 695, in which in most areas is probably no more than a 55-mile-an-hour zone, maybe 65 in some limited places, and I'm driving the police car, and I'm driving at 80 miles an hour, and you're ahead of me, and you're, and I track and I stay behind you for a mile. Isn't it a fair assumption that you are speeding? I mean, if I'm doing 80 and behind you, and we maintain that distance between you and I for a mile, isn't it pretty clear to me that you got to be doing more than 80, or else I'm going to run into your trunk or something? Right?
Not more than 80, but certainly more than speed limit. The question is, how does the trier effect believe the officer over me, and what credibility does he have if he's an officer? That's it. The only credibility he has is he's a job. He's a job, so there's no credibility. So we can talk on forever about.
Let's move on. Let's move on because really getting into who you're going to believe, me or your lying eyes kind of thing, sort of a Trumpism situation.
Yeah.
But last week we talked about dismantling the Department of Education, and I'm somewhat delighted and encouraged by the fact that there's a California judge who just issued one of 26 nationwide injunctions now against Trump, requiring him to cease and desist from further efforts to dismantle it, to put it back into place, and in fact, to return the employees who were discharged, return them to their former position. Now, like most court orders, including the Supreme Court, more likely than not, this administration is going to say, pound the sand. They're just simply going to ignore it. They're going to obfuscate it. In fact, as many of the judges have said, they're going to come to court, even although they say they're going to abide by the law. They come to court and they deliberately lie and mislead the court about what they're going to do, or they come outright as Marco Rubio says, "There's no court in this country that has any jurisdiction over me, as long as I'm carrying out the will of the president." So where have we come to? What happens is Roberts right? Is Justice Roberts, Chief Judge Justice Roberts right to fear that the law really doesn't matter anymore? That the attacks on judges to either impeach them just because they issue an opinion that you don't like, and it happens to be an opinion that's adverse to a president who thinks he's king and anointed. That where are we going with this? Why isn't the public? Why isn't the media in an uproar over this situation?
So let's go back initially to the order. So back in March, President Trump signed an executive order directing Secretary of Education Linda McMahon,
who didn't know what AI was.
And for the audience, McMahon is the same thing that owns WWE. Well, used to own the WWE. So the wrestling company family.
Right.
She's the
Linda McMahon, I think her name.
Linda McMahon. Yeah. She's the Secretary of Education.
Right.
And it ordered her to wind down non-essential functions of the department. They terminated 1,300 employees, and an additional 600 quit voluntarily, reducing the department in half. The judge basically determined that the Trump administration overstepped its bounds. I said it to you, I think, last week. Congress has been silent. The administration has taken their power openly and doing, and so the judge basically was like, "You can't do that. That's Congress power. You don't have the power to actually, without Congress stepping in, you don't have the power to do that." And basically, by doing that, you're preventing the department's ability to fulfill its purpose by statute. Mm-hmm. By statute, it must do things like ensure special education and financial aid and civil rights enforcement for students. Based on what you're doing, it can't fulfill its mandate legislatively. As a result, you're not legally able to do that. Now, that should have been a Congress conversation. They should have been open. They should have been on TV saying, "Hold on, Mr. President, you can't do that." They've been weak, and I'm not sure why. The injunction basically requires them, as you said, to rehire people, but also to put back in place the actual duties of the education that they try to cancel. The hard thing is, and the issue we have is, and you mentioned Roberts, it's his fault. It's Roberts' fault. When Roberts came out with the order saying basically Trump couldn't commit crimes, he emboldened him. You can't say you can't commit crimes and then say we going in the wrong direction by arresting judges. They can't commit crimes. So what we talked about it for? The administration has been adverse to everyone. They are arresting judges. They're arresting political
Congresspeople in New Jersey, the mayor of New York,
they're prosecutors.
They're going to investigate Andrew Cuomo, former governor of New York.
Letitia James,
Letitia James, right?
They're going after anybody that they want to go after.
And some people believe they tried to kill Josh Shapiro.
And we've heard silence. And the issue here, and someone asked me before about a dictatorship, and we're not really a dictatorship in that when the president makes an order, the military don't come to your door, the police don't come to your door. And other branches of government are free to do what they want to. They're not doing anything. They haven't stood up.
Well, all the guys with guns work for him. U.S. Marshals, the Army, the Navy. He's the commander in chief. Who's going to arrest him?
He's the commander in chief. Congress is the one that I guess make the laws, but also they appoint the funds. They can pull funds back. They have not. They haven't even talked about pulling funds. They keep approving bills. They are still in the process of passing the laws that he wants. So it's not only that he has the guns. That's true. He has the guns. But we have other branches of government. The courts have been the only ones saying, "Hold up, what y'all doing again? Based on what power? You don't have that power." And they said it over and over again. And every time they said to the administration, "You have no power," Congress hasn't said a word. So even though you're right, they keep going over the power because Congress won't step in.
And part of the reason is people need that when courts and people talk about congressional action, the laws that we're talking about did not become laws simply by virtue of an act of Congress passing both the House and the Senate. They only became law by that occurring and the signature of the president at that time, or it could have been, or unless it was in some way vetoed.
Yeah.
So when you try to unilaterally reverse the action of the other two branches of government,
you're undermining your position too.
Yeah, because you're not. It's just not the House of Representatives and the Senate. It's also action that was taken by the president at that, and you have no greater power than the president at that time. The Constitution didn't change from number 30 to number 45.
You asked Trump. He got more power than Biden.
Well, that's because he's anointed. He wasn't. I mean, he suggested we don't even need any more elections, for God's sake. You know what? Why? You know, he'll run the thing till he dies, and his doctors tell him that's never going to happen.
We've never seen a president this adverse to a prior administration. He was adverse when he became the president the first time. He was adverse to Obama, but not really. He's been extremely adverse to Biden's policies and procedures
because he thinks Biden's presidency was illegitimate. He's never. Donald Trump, as far as I know, has never said. In fact, has always said, continually said that the election was stolen. He didn't care what the votes were. If he didn't get enough votes, I mean, the call to Georgia. I mean, he only needed 10 or 11,000 votes to win Georgia. I mean, you know, since everybody knew he was supposed to win, why wouldn't you just give him the damn votes?
So with that in mind, and we are facing a constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
The branches of government aren't operating the way they're supposed to. Congress is visible. The courts are making orders that no one's listening to, and the president is running roughshod. We should be seeing the media running around with their hair on fire, and we have not. We should be seeing Congress people. Only people we see is Bernie Sanders and AOC. That's not enough. And and you say I throw around liberal and conservative. Democrats and Republicans, doesn't matter what side you want. Everyone in Congress should be saying, hold on, Mr. President, that's our power. People don't get power away that easily, and they've given it away, and they've turned their back and haven't said a word. And when he wants something, they try to ram it through.
That's because they want to keep their jobs. That's because keeping that little congressional pin and being able to walk in the House Rayburn building and park in the garage and walk in the tunnel so you don't have to get wet in the rain. All those symbols of power are more important to them than the Constitution.
I feel like
they say kissing Donald Trump's butt is the best way to keep their office.
I feel like they overestimate the power of the people who support Trump. Trump had this very solid base of people who vote for him no matter what. And that base don't go away. But that base is that large. In every jurisdiction that have conservative senators and congressmen, they can get elected without that base. And they still are afraid of that base and afraid of turning their back to it.
Can you guarantee that? Because if you could guarantee that, a lot of them would come your way, I think.
No, I can't guarantee, but you can't guarantee either way. You can't guarantee they still won't be able because since Trump has been around, they've gotten rid of senators and congressmen like that.
Yeah.
Even the ones who supported them, they've gotten rid of them. So the best bet is for Congress to stand up and actually identify who they are and what they do and not let the president. If we want to go a different route for the country, go the right way. Have all three branches of government operate. There's checks and balances for a reason, and right now there's no check or balance.
Well, our producer has given us a list of other things that are important, at least as we see it in the minds of the public. We have to talk about this issue. In the United States at the present time, there's one black governor. Only one.
Governor Wes Moore, for people who don't know.
Governor Wes Moore in the state of Maryland.
How many have they been in history? How many in history have we had?
I have no idea. Why don't we have our producer
look it up and see.
Do a fact check, a real fact check.
I suspect it's been no more than 10, but that's
I'd be surprised if it's that many. But I'm going to focus on this governor and what he did with what's designated as Senate Bill 587.
One thing about for the audience, our producer said we've had 5.
Who are they? Who are they?
It's a long conversation.
Google.
I think we'll put the 5 governors on the screen for you guys.
Google will tell you. Okay. So the Maryland legislature overwhelmingly passed, and some say, well, what do you expect if if the majority Democrats, overwhelmingly Republicans and Democrats, passed a bill to establish a Maryland Reparations Commission, which would not just study the effects of the oppression of Black folk as manifested in evidence during physical slavery and Jim Crow and all of that, but also to quantify it in dollars and cents, to come up with a determination of what remedy might be owed by the state of Maryland. And that's important. What remedy might be owed by the state of Maryland, not by any particular group of people or taxpayers, but by the state itself. That the commission. Now, several other states have already enacted reparation commissions, as well as Baltimore City. But Governor Wes Moore, in an astoundingly surprising move, decided to defy the will of the General Assembly and particularly the Legislative Black Caucus, and he vetoed. Well, I say surprised because I was contacted by one or more members of the Maryland General Assembly just to talk about this issue, about the governor's veto of the bill. Why do you think why America's only Black governor, all eyes now on the state of Maryland, because it's considering this far-reaching, and for the first time, a bill that's finally been passed in Maryland to try to quantify in dollars what's owed to the descendants of the oppression of American Black people. Why did he veto that bill? Why does, first of all, do you know, what did he say, if you recall? What did he offer as the reason for vetoing that bill?
I want to go back some for the audience. Reparations isn't anything new. In Nazi Germany, or in Germany, I should say, not Nazi Germany. I know the Germans take offense to that. In Germany, after Hitler and the Nazis were imprisoned and run out of power, they gave reparations to Jews. In the country, we've history of reparations. During World War II, we interned Japanese citizens in internment camps. We gave reparations to those people for our actions, our transgressions. There have been numerous instances of countries giving reparations throughout history in recent years. In the U.S., we had what we call chattel slavery. And we had it not only in the U.S., but we had it in the West. We had it in the New World, so to speak, whether it's the Caribbean, Brazil, South America. They were slaves, and it wasn't. And some say indentured service before too. People were forced into servitude based on their race, and they brought them here, and they used them, and they abused them in horrific ways. They changed the nature of the country. The country has changed forever by the contribution of people who were former slaves in this country. Since slavery, they also legalized discrimination, whether it was Jim Crow, it was redlining, it was a number of things that were done to the free slaves to keep them from progressing. And we see things like Rosewood and Tulsa. We talk about examples of Black towns and Black Wall Street, so to speak, being demolished, so people being killed. I mean, literally, they bombed. Only example of time you will know in our history in this country of bombing civilians have been Blacks. They literally bombed Black towns, at least one Black town, from the air to kill the Black, Tulsa, Oklahoma, to kill the Black inhabitants because of race riots and because they were quote unquote Black Wall Street. They actually were doing well. So every time that Blacks have made some progress after post-slavery and post-Jim Crow, they've been knocked back down economically and socially. Lynching in this country wasn't just to kill Blacks, it was a political statement. It was a statement saying, you know your place. Anytime we want to, we can kill you, and we're going to lynch you, and we do it prominently and publicly to put you back in your place. So as a result, and currently, African Americans give a tremendous amount to this country, to the culture and society and community. However, the majority of Blacks are poor. It's nature. They haven't been able to make it from poverty and slavery and Jim Crow and all the things to wealth or middle class. And we have that. We have Blacks who are billionaires, and we have athletes who make hundreds of millions dollar contracts, but most Black folks are poor. and they're poor because of systemic racism and legalized racism. The idea that reparations may make sense isn't unusual. I mean, I think Georgetown recently gave reparations to descendants of slaves who helped build Georgetown. They said, "Know what? We were able to grow because we had free labor, or labor from people that we couldn't pay for. We had slaves. We'll give their descendants.
We took what didn't belong to us,
and we'll try to make amends. You can't ever make amends, but we'll try to make amends legally. We'll use the legal
system." As lawyers, what's supposed to happen? As lawyers, what's supposed to happen when you take something that doesn't belong to you?
Hopefully, you get penalized for it. You either go to jail or you make amends. And make amends could be.
How about in law? Don't you call it restitution?
Restitution. You make amends.
What's the difference between restitution and reparation?
Depends on who you ask. If you ask someone who's getting it, it's no different. You ask someone who's giving it who don't like it, it's a world difference. So the idea now we're saying, people saying it doesn't make sense because the people who did that to the blacks are no longer around. And to your point, you said all the time, and I agree. We're not asking for reparations from a random person off the street. We're saying the government passed laws. The government allowed the abuse of these people.
Right.
The government is responsible, and the government means me. So reparations, if they were paid, however they paid, I pay taxes. I mean, I'm paying towards it as well.
Right.
This isn't a people walking around with their handout saying, "I want a free lunch." This is saying there should be a recognition for the atrocities that happen, unmatched in the modern world, to these people, and we see the consequence of it. Even the war on drugs. It's so many things that happen to the Black community after slavery that continue to keep Black and the Black community poor and dependent. And reparations, as an example, say we need to find a way so that we say, one, we're sorry. The government has to say that was wrong. That's an important step. Having the government admit to the fact that everything we did was, although we said it was legal, it wasn't morally right, and we're at fault for it. And we will make amends this way. That's important. The reason, and I never thought Westmore was going to sign the reparations bill. I was surprised to even put it to him in the way he wants to run for president. It's clear to me. I haven't talked to Governor Westmore about this or his people, so I don't want to give an impression. We've had conversations. I'm very clear that he wants to be the president. How they show him, how he interacts, how he moves, his background, his vitae, everything. He's walking and talking Obama-esque.
Well, how does vetoing this bill in furtherance of his quest for assuming that he had such a quest? Well, how is this further that
the idea for people to be elected is always a concern that people, if you're too quote unquote Black, they won't vote for you. If you're too Black, and the idea of reparation is a Black idea. Now, if a white person, a white governor, which they have, say, "Hey, I don't mind signing the bill for reparations," they don't get the same kind of flack. I believe the analysis from his people and from the political minds in his administration would say, if you sign this, it will paint you as a Black governor versus a governor, and you will never get elected nationwide because they will only see you as being the Black governor. And that's why I was surprised he even let it go forward. He should have talked to the legislature and found a way to get it done without making the actual formal bill of it. If he knew he couldn't, based on his evaluation, sign it. But what I don't think they accounted for is, although people in Maryland like you, the rest of the country is going to see you're a Black governor of a state that's fairly liberal, and you vetoed a bill about reparations when places like California did not. That's a big question for a Black, not only Black, but anyone who thinks about race in any real way is going to see that veto and will ask, why would you do that? And what are your real plans? Especially considering he's having trouble with the budget, especially considering before he became elected, the book he wrote about T. West Morris was under fire for his depiction of himself, his connection to the Black community in Baltimore. I think that may backfire on him in a bigger way than he anticipated.
What block of vote? You say that the connection between the veto is that it's somehow related to his desire to become president. What block of prospective or potential voters do you think he thought would be affected by adversely affected by if he allowed the bill simply to become law? He didn't have to sign it. If he did nothing, it would have become law just because he did nothing. So who was he trying to appease by vetoing it?
The Democrats, one, I think independent voters, he thinks some may go over to conservative if they have a choice between a Black candidate or a non-Black candidate. Independents, I also think that the liberals, for some reason, assume they can pull some of the conservative voters to their side. I'm not persuaded by that. The liberals we have, so certain certain people can. I think Biden had the ability to pull conservative voters to the Democrat side. I think Clinton had that ability as well. I don't think Wes Moore has it now or will ever have the ability to pull people to his side. I don't think it. I don't think he had the personality for it. I don't think he had the platform for it. I don't think it. Clinton had it based on him being a Southern guy and people seeing him and liking him, so they willing to vote for him. Biden had it based on him being a union guy. I don't think Wes Moore has it. So even though he wants to protect that possible voter block, I don't think he's going to get it either way.
So the voting block, if you were to describe that voting block that he was trying to appeal to by vetoing this bill, how do you describe it? Tall, short, fat, green?
For the audience, I think Bob is me to say white voters, basically white voters. He wants middle America white voters who may be liberal or conservative to vote for him, and that he believes that, because certainly reparations are hot topic issues on the coast. They're talked about in New York and in Maryland and DC. They're talked about in California, but the Midwest, they're not talked about as much. It's not as big a push for it because the Black community isn't as large in those places. The history isn't as large, not enough there. So he wants those voters, and I feel that he believes that it's an issue for him. It may not be. They may not care whether Maryland get reparations or talk about it. And keep in mind, it didn't say they approved reparation and they can get Black folks checks. They said a commission. They want to start a commission for reparation to even study it. So the idea that studying the commission is too far, I don't think voters in the Midwest would have cared about it, to be honest. But that's my view. I'm not paid the big bucks. He pays, I'm sure, advisors a bunch of money to make judgment calls, and I'm sure their view is different than mine.
Well, I think the bill called for just a little more than simply to study. I think that there also, as I said earlier, I think it was also supposed to actually quantify the amount of, quote, damages that should be paid by the government for the unlawful acts that were committed. And it may have gone even further to try to identify those people or the descendants of those people who were entitled to receive all or a portion of those damages, and to determine in what form those damages ought to be made available, whether it's cash, whether it's building a new hospital in a certain area, whether it's correcting roads. I mean, so this bill would have done much more than study, and it would have gone even further if they committed the resources than some of the reparation bills that have been passed in other jurisdictions, and would have put the state ahead of Baltimore City, which had a reparations commission approved about 2 years ago. Our illustrious producers holding up a sign that is writing in pink that I absolutely cannot read because my eyes are watering and they're getting old anyway, and I cannot read. MAGA, is that what that says? MAGA. Oh, okay. Well, make America great again. Now, some people think that means make America white again, but I have to stop those and say, when was it ever that? And so, what do you mean by make America white again? You mean, speaking that, how do you? What is that the message that Trump intended to send by declaring South Afrikaners 7% of the population in South Africa, who control over 50% of the farmland? Was that and allowing them as the only group of refugees to enter the country? Was that the message that his was to make America white again?
To that point, I meant to bring a clip in. So for the audience is aware, there was a flight from South Africa to America that landed in Dulles, and they had Afrikaners. White Afrikaners are settlers in South Africa, historically from Dutch background. They settled in South Africa many, many years ago, and they've controlled South Africa ever since. There was a revolution in the country. Nelson Mandela became president, and Black folks in the country still poor. Like it hasn't changed. It's changing that the government is typically, and you see it outwardly, has been a Black government. But the Afrikaners, the property owners, are still the white landholders, and they still have the wealth. Trump has determined that they were going through genocide. Now,
using fake pictures and videos.
But even if they were real, Trump doesn't have to be a lawyer. He has more lawyers working for him than you can imagine. Every employee he has, whether he was a private person or in government, are lawyers. They know what genocide means, and whatever he was describing isn't genocide. But that's what I'll say this: it's troubling. The example of that. So when they came to the country and they interviewed one of his department heads, and what he said was, "Why did they ask you why are you prioritizing them? It's people from Afghanistan who were en route. It's people who are
on the plane.
People on the plane. People in
Man.
war-torn areas who need support. You cancel them and you bring these people over." And one of the things he said was, "We want people who can assimilate to U.S. Culture." He said the word assimilate. For the audience means people who can easily come in and blend in. Well, why can't an Afghan blend in, but a South African can blend in? A white South African can blend in because they're white. That's it. They're white. They openly said it. I don't think he meant for it to be a hot mic moment or say that way.
Wait a second. Now, wasn't assimilation the goal of the civil rights movement for Black people?
So you go. I'm not even gonna address that. He's going way too far afield. Let's get back to the MAGA thing. So I think Trump was asked when he first ran. When was America great? I think he said 1920 or sometime where it was still Jim Crow. I think women had limited rights, and that was the time frame. And I'm always drawn to the fact that "Make America Great Again" was a David Duke slogan. David Duke was a former Grand Wizard of the Klan, and he ran for president years ago. And his slogan was "Make America Great Again." And his slogan wasn't about, "Oh, I just want a time in history." His slogan was white supremacy. And so it's taken from one person to another person. In my mind, it has not changed the nature of the slogan. So when Trump says "Make America Great Again," he means white control and white lead. And we know that because he's been hell bent on pushing immigrants out. When he was first in office, he called the countries that were diverse shithole countries. Whether it was Nigeria, whether it was the Middle Eastern countries, they were shithole countries. The people weren't white. He talks about bringing immigration from Europe. They're white. He's openly brought immigrants in, fast-tracked them in from South Africa who were white. He's openly deported. He's put people in prisons in countries they're not from. He's sending people to El Salvador for prison, even though they're from Laos or they're from Pakistan. And to the idea, like, hold on, why are they in prison in a foreign country? How they getting back home? But he's been very aggressive with people being deported who were from non-white. No, some whites have been deported too. The vast majority we saw in real time in this country. They were riding on horses, getting Haitians for deportation. We saw in real time there were orders in place for countries like Haiti and the DR where they were here for a special work visa. He canceled them and deported them as if they were here legally. All the ones he's been very adverse to anything ethnic in a way that's been troubling. His attempt to clean the federal government. He's been one of the first people he fired was the head of the Joint Chief of Staff was a black general. He fired them and brought someone in who now is qualified. We talked last week about Carla Hayden. She was the first black and first woman head of the Library of Congress. She's an employee of Congress, which I don't even know how he fired her. He fired her and he hired his lawyer to do the job. Someone who's
fired her because she was a black female coming from a jurisdiction that voted against him primarily, overwhelmingly, Baltimore City and the state of Maryland. I mean, you don't have to. Ray Charles could see that, but you know I lost my thought.
No, but so the question is, make America white again?
Aren't these people these people who committed to make America white again? Are these the same people that Hillary Clinton was referring to when she used the term deplorables? Isn't it the same group?
Everyone is the fan of Hillary Clinton, and however, and she's from the South as well. She said it. She got flack for it. When she said it, it was a hot mic. She meant it.
But isn't it true?
I think the Clintons are very keen on the country, and they're keen on people, and they had a very clear idea. And I'm not the biggest Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton fan for all kind of reasons. However, something that she said has been spot on, and there's been no pullback from it. And although when Trump came down the stairs, the escalator, I talk about the Mexicans are racist and rapists, and people smiled and laughed like, "Oh, isn't he crazy?" He's continued that sentiment and had to stop.
Isn't one of the reasons why the Democratic Party didn't seem to be as supportive of Biden as it should have been? I'm talking about even before there was any notion of his physical or mental ailments, is because they in fact adhered to the fundamental principle that was then being espoused within the Trump party that relating to white supremacy. In other words, the Democratic Party, which is itself, notwithstanding its so-called diversity, the fact of the matter is, it's a party that's still controlled and run by white men. Isn't the problem that they had is that they knew that the glue that held together the MAGA base was in support of the concept of white supremacy, and because they also supported that very principle themselves.
So I wouldn't go as far, and I could be. I know. Look, the country is diverse. It's not that diverse. We're in the place where we're in the black spaces where we're in Maryland is very liberal. Even some parts of Maryland isn't that liberal. Blacks make up 30% of the population. We're a small minority. Hispanics make what, 20%, 20% of the population. I mean, the reality is the majority still runs the country and they still have power control. Even though we're 13% of the population, Hispanics a little bit more. Neither the Hispanic population or the black population are enough to move the needle in politics and law. We have too few black lawyers and judges. We have too few Hispanic lawyers and judges. We have too few people in Congress from those backgrounds. So the result, representation isn't what you think it is. We're there and we're in the public and we can serve people, but we're not there at the table enough to make a real push. So although their control, their numbers are decreasing, their control has not decreased. You look at Congress, it's almost homogenous. The ones who not white men, we know them. We know Tlaib. We know who she is. We know AOC. We know them by name because there's so few of them.
Particularly Ms. Crockett.
We know Jasmine Crockett. Yes.
If the goal of diversity, whatever diversity means, and I haven't seen a definition of it in anywhere that you could apply to any uniformly to any particular situation. But if the goal of diversity is in fact to get people from different backgrounds who presumably because of that difference have the ability to contribute something that no other group not having that background can contribute, then how do we know when a person is diverse? Because that goes not that it may be like the Temptation said that beauty is only skin deep, but determining the extent to which your background is still part of how you live goes much deeper than the skin. So how do we know? Hasn't that been one of the problems? And the leadership, if you will, within the black community.
So for the audience, in case you haven't caught that, what Attorney DeShield is saying here, all skin folks ain't kin folk.
That's exactly what
he's saying. The fact that someone looks like you and it doesn't mean they have the same values, morals, and beliefs that you have. And the answer to that is you're 100% right. And I would argue that more often than not, the people we elect aren't from the same backgrounds we're from. At a larger office. So like in Baltimore City, they elected Brandon Scott. I think Brandon Scott is from the same community that most of the voters who are black in Baltimore City are from. Your state delegate, I think the state representatives are typically from those same locations. But when you get to people in Congress and get the people running for presidency and get in a larger office, they are from a different background. It's a money game. If you're running for president, you need a lot of money. And Brandon Scott, for example, doesn't have the reach. No offense, Brandon Scott, if you see this, have the reach to raise those millions and millions of dollars to run for president because his base and his population and his background is capped in a more local background. Whereas someone like President Barack Obama, when he ran, he had much more broader appeal because he wasn't from Southside Chicago. He's not a Southside guy. Right. He talked about it because he moved there and he wanted to be around, but that's not who he was. So the idea that, yes, you have to be discerning as to who you pick to lead you, even if you think they're going to lose the election. So the person you want, you say they can't win because whites won't vote for them, it still could be your best candidate, and we haven't done that historically in our community.
We're gonna talk about something that is not one of my favorite topics, and we'll probably end with this because our producer says people want to talk about it, and you agree. What's going on with P. Diddy and this situation? I mean, I first of all, let me say very clearly, I do not have an obligation because I'm black to defend.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
I reject the notion that because I'm black, I have a duty and obligation to try to defend P. Diddy. He didn't do anything he did as a black man or because he was a black man. He did it because of the nature of the beast within inside him. And whatever he may have done or not done, because I don't know, I wasn't there. And I just like when they asked Stevie Wonder, did you ever attend? Yeah, but I didn't see a thing. Okay, so So what's up
Combs
with P. Diddy?
from New York, went to illustrious Howard University. His story was amazing that he would commute from Howard to New York weekends to work as a A&R, and he basically revolutionized revolutionized hip hop when he brought Bad Boy, which was Biggie Smalls, the late Biggie Smalls, and Little Kim and Lil C's, and he changed the sound of hip hop. He went on to be a very successful businessman. He was the face of a liquor brand. He did all the things that historically we have been kept from doing. And going to your other point, certain people can move up. He was from a certain background, but he may not have been the same as other people from the same background. I'll say that. He is currently on trial. And so I'll say this: you've had many trials. I've been trying cases for at this point more than 15 years, and how criminal and civil, how they are handling this case is different than I've seen in my experience in trying cases. The prosecutor has been very graphic in terms of the things that people went through. So this is a case I'm sure people know, sex trafficking case where he allegedly sex trafficked his girlfriend, then girlfriend Cassie, and other people as well. I think one witness is missing now. They can't find one of the victims is in the wind, and Cassie has been the primary witness. It was a lawsuit a few years back. After the lawsuit, the prosecutor charged them. But it seemed to me, and it's very salacious, and I think it's on purpose. They're trying to try him not based on the things that he did, but how horrific it sounds. They're using language and they're using words, and they're saying things in court that you never hear about in court. Even the issue of baby oil. I think the judge would say, I don't want to hear about no more baby oil. I don't want to hear about baby oil. The only reason you talk about baby oil because he had 1,000,000 bottles. It sounds salacious. It seems over the top, but it seems to me the prosecutor, and it's interesting, is trying to convince the jury that he's such a bad person. He has committed these crimes. And I'm going to show you how bad he is. He's so deviant. He's so disturbed that anything we say about him is true. Anything he says is wrong. And it seems to me you can't try cases that way. You can't make a person guilty because they're a bad person. You can, juries do all kinds of things that shouldn't be how our system works. It shouldn't be based on the fact that and the things that they say sounds horrible. They were doing things that I couldn't even conceive of until they said it. Like, people do that? I wouldn't have thought that. I wouldn't have conceived of them being things. Now, your point is he didn't do them as a black man. I agree. He didn't do them because he was African American, but they're using that. They're doing the same tropes from Jim Crow. You have big black bucks. The idea that these overly aggressive, overly sexual, overly big black men. To the point, the first witness they had, one of the witnesses they had was a stripper who was involved, who was a black man who was dark skinned with a bald head. You couldn't get more into You couldn't get more into the stereotypes. You couldn't get more into it. I think his name was like Destroyer or
start with a D too. Okay, all right. Look, I didn't come here for this.
But it plays into stereotypes as to what black men are.
Yeah.
Overly sexualized, the darker skinned person, overly aggressive, and they contrasted the gentleman with the alleged victim, Cassie, who was a very light complexioned woman, very very slender. At the time she's in trial, she's pregnant, which makes it even worse. So she's on the stand, pregnant, talking about all the sexual abuse she suffered at the hands of Puffy Combs, who most of it he didn't do himself. It was other people who did the stuff. Other people who also were black men, and they talked about it. All the men it was mostly black men they had to find. They had to find black men with big genitals, and it felt like it was like a slave auction. Hold on, what y'all talking about? Oh, this is criminal trial?
Sounds like the NFL draft to me.
It does sound like the NFL draft the way they depict it. But even that, it harkens back to a way to show black men in a negative way. And for me, I know people find it salacious that all things that happen. I find it unfortunate that they're having the full trial and they're putting a black man, not Puffy, the idea of a black man on trial. We're absolutely derogatory and overly hypersexual and overly aggressive and overly abusive in a way that's been, to me, offensive.
Okay. Listen, I know that we are nearing the end of our time here if we haven't already gone over it. So let me take the last 30 seconds or so to inform you of how we are trying to continually improve and change the program, not just for the purpose of trying to satisfy viewer requests, because our mission here is to educate, to inform, to debate, to show that there can be different opinions and that they can be, but that the opinion should be based upon, as best as you can determine, fact and not feeling. Because when you base your opinion on feeling, you're really utilizing the wrong bodily part for thinking purposes. There are things that your butt will need to do, but thinking is not one of them. And so, anyway, let's move on. Beginning next week, we're going to make some structural changes in the program. For one, you'll be able to call in. We're gonna next week give you a number that you'll be able to see, and you can call in and actually discuss us. We'll have a speaker here, and we can have some real interaction with you on that. The other thing is we're thinking about having someone who can, in addition to our assist our producer, and engaging with us through another microphone on some of the topics that we actually see you comment upon on the chat line, because where we are, we don't see the chats necessarily, and sometimes we need prodding from other folks just to keep us on track and to alert us that the viewers may have an interesting topic that we touched upon, and so we ought to return to it or explore it more deeply. In any event, our goal, as I say, Hassan's goal, and I, and the Tia's and Constance, everybody who works with this program, our goal is to be a source of information, particularly for the Black community. And we want, because right now we live in an era, we've been in an era since Trump began, where truth doesn't seem to matter. Where, as Kellyanne Conway once said, that we can have an alternative truth. Or as Rudy Giuliani once said, sometimes the truth is just not true. Well, both of those are kind of silly and ominous statements, really. What we want to give you is information. We invite you to verify, and we hope that you understand that the fact that you may, from a reliable source, find a quote fact that seems to disagree with the facts doesn't mean that either that source or ours is evil. It just means that two informed people can have different opinions about what the facts really are. But in no event does a fact evolve simply from something that we believe. The fact that we believe it doesn't mean it's true, in other words. This is Robert Dashiell again on this Friday, May 23rd, Memorial Day weekend, with you, along with our co-host, Hassan Barnes, attorney Hassan Barnes, with another edition of Money, Power, and Politics. See you next Friday.
Take care, guys.